Convicted murderers Lyle and Erik Menendez could potentially soon be freed from prison. On Thursday, Los Angeles County District Attorney George Gascón said he will recommend the brothers be resentenced in the 1989 killings of their mother and father at their Beverly Hills home.
We're going to recommend to the court that the life without the possibility of parole be removed. We're very sure not only that the brothers have rehabilitated and that they will be safe to be reintegrated in our society, but that they have paid their dues, not only for the crimes that they committed, but because of all the other things they have done to improve the life of so many others.
The district attorney added Lyle and Erik's sentences were already scheduled to be reviewed in November, but a recent flood of calls, media attention, and new evidence urged him to expedite their case. Joining us now is CBS News national correspondent Jonathan Vigliotti, who was at the DA's press conference in Los Angeles Thursday afternoon. Jonathan, break down what the district attorney said.
Yeah, Lindsay, I was inside that briefing room. I was actually sitting next to the 92-year-old grandmother of the brothers. She's been a staunch advocate for the release of them for many years. There were moments of tears, a sigh of relief as the district attorney made that announcement. DA Gascón starting off saying that his office was divided on this decision, but going on to say, and I'm quoting here, "I came to a place where I believe under the law, resentencing is appropriate," and he defined what that means. He's going to recommend parole immediately. Another family member there, a cousin of the brothers, saying today is a day of hope, and this day made possible in light of new evidence that's emerged, including a letter that Erik Menendez wrote back in 1988, so just about a year before these murders, to his cousin, where he was saying that he was afraid to be around his father and alluded to sexual abuse. Sexual abuse was a key component of the defense, but in 1996, in that trial that led to their convictions, it was restricted from being brought into that courtroom, which led to their conviction and life without parole. So now what's next? When will they be released? According to the DA, this is now in the hands of a judge who will review the case and hold a hearing in about 3 to 4 weeks. There has been some discussion, specifically with the defense attorney, saying that the brothers could be home as soon as Thanksgiving. But, Lindsay, those that we've spoken with, legal experts, say that seems unlikely at this time, Lindsay.
Okay, Jonathan Vigliotti in Los Angeles, thank you. For more, let's bring in CBS News legal contributor Jessica Levinson. She's also a professor at Loyola Law School in Los Angeles. Jessica, are you surprised by the district attorney's decision?
No, we have a district attorney here who has said that he's amenable to this petition. He actually brought forth a petition for resentencing, and he was very explicit about saying we've been under a lot of public pressure. Now, it's also important for people to know that this is a DA who's facing re-election in 12 days. He's down about 30 points in the polls. And so when he says, I'm facing public pressure, it just lands differently. So I'm not surprised. I think, frankly, the thing that was surprising is that one of the first things he said is there's dissent in the office. And so we really have to see what happens in court after he files. We need to really look to see what are the specific charges he's moving forward with, and how is he arguing that they are subject to being released immediately. And there is some complication in California law. If he's saying, I want to stick with the crimes of 2 first-degree murders for each of them, there's a complication in California law which essentially would not allow you to take out that life without the possibility of parole. But there's a question about the timing of when that law went into effect and whether or not it would apply to the Menendez brothers. All of which is to say there's a lot of complexity here.
So those are just a couple of the roadblocks. I mean, you have previously said that typically a judge will say yes to something like this, not a guaranteed rubber stamp, but there are a lot of roadblocks. We talked about that potential dissent. Pull on that, Fred, for a little bit for us, and other roadblocks that you see.
So this is such an important question because most of the time a DA goes to a judge and says, I've looked at the evidence. My office was the one to try this case. And I think that in the interest of justice, here's the resentence that I suggest. And a judge, not a rubber stamp, but will look and typically defer. What we have here is we have the complexity of the election. A judge, while it would be improper to ever explicitly say so, might want to wait to see if there is a different DA, if that different DA has a different recommendation. We also have, as we just talked about, that complexity of whether or not DA Gascón is saying 2 first-degree murders, but with taking out that life without the possibility of parole. that is a, let's say, live legal question in California law as to whether or not he can do that. Add to that the fact that you might have members of the DA's office, either the resentencing unit or the habeas unit, who are walking into court saying, I don't agree with my boss. And I'll say, we just have to throw out the here's what typically happens part of this.
So as we mentioned, there was a couple of pieces of evidence recently introduced that prompted the DA to reconsider the sentences. How much of a role did these new pieces of evidence, this letter that Jonathan mentioned from Erik to one of their cousins alluding to molestation, and then another victim, a member of the band Menudo, who was saying that he was a victim, how much did these new pieces of evidence factor in, you think?
So I think it's everything. I think it's the new evidence, and it's also the fact that in the original trials here, there was more evidence of alleged sexual abuse that was introduced. Those trials, as we just heard, there were hung juries in those trials. The second trials, when they were actually convicted, there was much less evidence of sexual abuse. So I think it's that there wasn't that evidence that existed at the time that was really brought forward in the second trials. And the idea that as a society, we have shifted. We don't question that young men could be subject to sexual abuse. Add to that the idea that there's new evidence that supports those allegations of sexual abuse. Add to that, again, I don't want to sound like a cynic, but the election calendar. And I think all of that together brings us to this moment.
Okay, Jessica Levinson, thank you so much.